Hello, very beautiful community. Today we're talking about the restructuring of Boris Johnson's mock Churchillian support for Ukraine so that he can suck up to Trump. So, what's a conversation like that really about? It's about us training our muscles to distinguish political entrepreneurs and post-truth populists in our information environment, whether that be in the domestic or in the foreign policy realm. And we'll do it by reading a piece I've just abridged for us that Alan Rusbridger, the editor of Prospect, has just penned. It's a very simple piece, but it just juxtaposes for us things that Bojo said before, things that Boris Johnson is saying now. What do we need to understand about Johnson? I think two features are worth commenting on. First is Johnson's presentation of charismatic, contrived dishevelment. That's a very central part of his persona. And it's very important that it comes in a kind of bumbling and bungling form that masquerades a lot of control. We talk about a lot of politicians being neurodiverse, whether they be autistic or ADHD or both. And we certainly had a very neurodiverse Prime Minister in the UK with Liz Truss. Despite cartoonishly mimicking some traits associated with ADHD, Boris Johnson is not, in my assessment, neurodiverse. He is neurotypical, and some of his bungling and bumbling, meandering is, in fact, contrived and compatible with a great deal of control, the kind of control that Boris showed, for instance, testifying at the COVID inquiry in the UK, where he gave an extremely disciplined performance, highly skillfully covering up his political misdeeds in a way that Trump couldn't do. Now, at the level of policy and political seriousness, Bojo is a buffoon, but he has a capacity to perform with discipline in a way that Trump doesn't. And as I say, he seems to me to be neurotypical. Now, another feature of Boris Johnson is his relationship with irresponsibility. He's not irresponsible. He is rather somebody who has no relationship with the concept of responsibility. It's like there is a gap in his head where a place for some such concept must exist. So he is, if you like, worse or different to just irresponsible politicians. He has no psychological relationship with a sense of responsibility at all. Whereas somebody irresponsible has a corrupted relationship with a sense of responsibility. Now, two quick distinctions you all know about very well before we jump into my abridged reading from Alan Rusbridger. You know that there are responsible politicians. Then there are political entrepreneurs. These are people who serve the waves of algorithm-mediated public opinion for personal advantage. They're not out to break democratic institutions, but if they break them, so be it. Also, political entrepreneurs are typically liars rather than people who simply give up on the very difference between truth and lies. And here we get to the third category of politician, and that's the post-truth populist, which Boris Johnson is and Trump is. So what post-truth populists do is they obscure the very difference between lies and truth in general and enter into a relationship with citizens or some citizens in which both sides, both parties half agree that truth doesn't matter. So to give you a reconstructed example, during the public health crisis, at the beginning of the public health crisis a few years ago, Johnson was talking about masks, and he was talking about it in a way that you'd recognize as Trumpian. They're very good. Do absolutely wear them, and it's a good idea, as my medical experts tell me to put him on. Now, I might not necessarily put mine on, and people have different opinions about it. And I did put it on last Tuesday, but then on the Thursday, I didn't feel like it. It's one of those things. Obviously, they're very, very good, but sometimes you don't feel like having it on. And I didn't have mine on, and you saw that. But I think they're good, and you should have them on. Or at least I'm told to say that. So that's post-truth, right? Whereas a lying politician just sort of has a sense of what's right and wrong, and then just misrepresents it systematically. A post-truth politician begins to destabilize that very relationship. Right? I'm sitting here talking to you, some people say, but others say I'm not here. A lot of people are saying that I'm not here. Very big, very important, tremendously important, very perfect people are saying that I am not here. And the people who are here, some of them are reliable, but some of them are just dogs, beautiful dogs, but still dogs, and they're saying that I'm here or that I'm not here, and I've lost completely a capacity to tell the difference anymore. So post-truth. Now, let's read Alan Rusbridger. Now, of course, you'd know Alan probably from his extraordinary stint as editor of The Guardian, and those of you who have a deep relationship with classical music may also know him through his profound relationship with classical music and his book about his experience as an amateur pianist. Boris Johnson, now I'm not going to put this on the screen because it's simple enough text, so I think we can do it. Boris Johnson does occasionally tell the truth, even if you have to go back nearly a decade to unearth his honest assessment of Donald Trump. In 2015, the then mayor of London accused the aspiring White House candidate of a quite stupefying ignorance that makes him frankly unfit to hold the office of President of the United States. Unquote. He wasn't wrong. Johnson was responding to some routinely offensive stuff that Trump was coming up with, while speculating about banning Muslim immigrants to the US and claiming that there were no-go areas in London for police because of large Muslim communities. Johnson responded, "I'd invite him to come and see the whole of London and take him around the city," said Johnson, "except that I wouldn't want to expose any Londoners to any unnecessary risk of meeting Donald Trump." As to the would-be president's suggestion of banning Muslim immigrants, Johnson accused him of being clearly out of his mind. But, and I know you'll find this hard to believe, Johnson soon changed his mind. His revised opinion was that Trump was on the contrary wise, sane, and uniquely suited to be the leader of the free world. Just over a year ago, by now a mere Daily Mail columnist rather than Prime Minister, Johnson endorsed Trump for a second term in office, saying this was just what the world needs. It would, he argued, be especially good for Ukraine. I simply cannot believe that Trump will ditch the Ukrainians. On the contrary, having worked out, as he surely has, that there is no deal to be done with Putin, I reckon there is a good chance that he will double down and finish what he started by giving them what they need to win. Unquote. Almost exactly a year later, we learned of Trump's chummy 90-minute phone call with Putin and witnessed J.D. Vance's chilling speech at Munich. It transpired that Trump was, in Applebaum's words, offering Ukraine more or less what the Versailles Treaty offered a defeated Germany in 1919, demanding that the US should take 50% of all economic value associated with resources in Ukraine, including mineral resources, oil and gas resources, ports and other infrastructure, not just now, but forever. Regardless, Johnson was still boosterish for Trump, urging Europeans, in the words of his Mail column last weekend, to stop panicking and stop whinging. That was 15th of February. Within days, Trump was openly attacking Zelensky and blaming Ukraine for having started the war with Russia, all Putin talking points. He said, without evidence, as the popular euphemism goes, that Zelensky had an approval rating of 4%. Now, this was ticklish for Johnson, who has cast himself as a Churchillian figure walking hand in hand toward gunfire with Zelensky, whom he lauded as an inspiration and a heroic war leader. How could he simultaneously keep on side with Trump while supporting his comrade in arms in Ukraine? In short, how could he have his cake and eat it? The answer came in a brilliantly crafted tweet of pure cakeism. Of course Ukraine didn't start the war. Of course there was no need to stage elections during a war. Of course it was untrue to say that Zelensky's rating was 4%. But really, we should all grow up and stop being scandalized. Trump's attacks on Zelensky were designed to be a wake-up call, quote, not intended to be historically accurate, unquote. This is a wonderfully Johnsonian phrase that readers could store up for use in a tight spot. As in, when I said there were no parties in Downing Street, it was not intended to be historically accurate. This is about the government violating its own regulations during the public health crisis. Awkwardly for Johnson, Trump doubled down the next day, accusing Zelensky of being a dictator who wanted to keep the gravy train going and warning him to move fast or he's going to lose his country. We may have to wait until next Saturday's Mail column to see whether Johnson is ready to admit that there is no future for cakeism in this matter. How delightful it would be to find Johnson admitting the truth, which is that Trump is an ignorant thug intent on selling Ukraine down the river. I imagine Zelensky has better things to do at the moment than read the Daily Mail. Far less fork out to read Johnson's musings behind a paywall. How stomach-churning it would be for him to discover that the man he once saw as a Churchillian ally is now acting as an apologist for Trump as the latter seeks to undermine, if not destroy him, Zelensky. Now, of course, you sometimes have to make difficult decisions where you ally with post-truth populists and post-truth authoritarians on the international scene. But particularly in domestic politics, it's very important to understand their unreliability. And it's very important that if you have a policy you're fond of in your country and a post-truth populist is pushing for it, happens to overlap with what you want to happen politically, be very skeptical that you're going to get what you want for two reasons. The first reason is they could flip-flop a year later. But the second reason is these are politicians who undermine democratic institutions, counter-majoritarian democratic institutions, institutions which Johnson tested during his premiership in the UK. And these are institutions you need to deliver any policy. These are politicians who are parasitic upon the very infrastructure for making anything constructive possible. So just keep that in mind, beautiful community. And also, let me just tell you something a bit banal but philosophical. The wonderful and literary musical genius Alfred Brendel, one of the four greatest pianists of all time, once asked the public intellectual Alfred Brendel, Isaiah Berlin, what the most universal value in the world was. And Isaiah thought about it like this, and he said, reliability. And what Berlin meant isn't that reliability is the only universal value. There are many others. Justice is a universal value. Liberty is a universal value. But what he meant is that reliability is not just a universal value, but it means more or less the same thing in different cultural circumstances, right? You say that you're gonna come in the morning, you come in the morning, right? And these politicians are parasitic upon that universal value. That's, of course, a less important philosophical aside. The bigger point here remains, right? They are parasitic upon the infrastructure of democracy that is a prerequisite for any constructive policy making, including the policies you want to have made. Lots of love. Bye bye.